Hey guys, how y'all doing? BionicleSaurus here, and welcome to part 2 of my 2019 Safari Ltd. Prehistoric World Figure Thoughts discussion type videos. In this video, we are going to be talking about the Allosaurus, the Steg, the Spino, and the Pteranodon. It's exactly what you were expecting. Of course, I won't take too long with this intro. I do want to say that I took a couple days on purpose. This is just, it's one of those things, I don't want to just be a person who does an initial reaction and then doesn't talk about them again in another video, because initial reactions are very rarely what final opinions end up being, and so I wanted to give myself a little bit of time to properly formulate what I really think about these figures, and I think I've kind of figured out my opinions on these 4 new models just from the images we have. Obviously, until I have them in person, I can't really properly review them or rate them, but for the information available, for what we can see, I think I am fairly confident in all that I'm about to say about them. So, without further ado, let's just get straight into the Pteranodon. That's the first one I want to talk about. The Pteranodon is gorgeous. There's really nothing overt to complain about. Accuracy-wise, apparently it has some issues. I'm not enough of a pterosaur expert to really point out what those are, although I do think that the beak should have a bit more of an upward curvature to it. And I'm pretty sure the top jaw should be a bit longer and should overlap the lower jaw. Beyond that, maybe the hands and claws are a bit exaggerated, but it really looks fairly good. It's probably the most accurate Pteranodon figure around, even if it still has some issues to it. And visually, this thing is just beautiful. Oh my gosh, I love the coloration on both the beak and the crest, especially the crest. That fade from white to orange is just, oh, that is so wonderful to look at. And the black sort of tiger stripe pattern, I would not ever think that that would work for a pterosaur's display crest, but somehow it does. In general, this thing has the general kind of soft tissue aesthetic appearance and the colors and whatnot of like a seafaring bird, like a gull or something. It's more brown than gray, but especially the colors of the crest and beak really scream like gull or albatross, and that's such a cool sort of modern fauna inspiration. And in general, this figure just looks gorgeous. The sculpted detail on both the pycnofibers and the wrinkly skin of the wings looks great. I like that it's in a standing pose, but it's not just standing, it's actually walking, so there's a bit more of a dynamic or fluid quality on this figure than there is with a lot of standing pterosaurs, because a lot of standing pterosaurs are just standing. There are some that have very unique and lifelike poses with a lot of motion captured in them, but those are kind of few and far between, actually. So, in general, this one looks pretty nice. You can see a lot of the skin on the wings really folding and stretching, and the musculature all looks good. Yeah, in general, this is just another really solid addition to Safari's 2019 lineup for prehistoric world figures specifically, and overall, this was a figure that I didn't immediately get kind of captured by, but the more I kind of stopped to actually look at it, the more I realized just how well done it is. It's honestly kind of a stunner. Now let's talk a little bit about the Stegosaurus. I'll tell you what I thought of this figure when I first saw it. When I first saw it, I thought, ooh, that pose is stiff, that pose is awkward, what is going on? The detail looks so lacking. And now I love it. I think I'm still like, I mean, it's still more of an 8 for me than like a proper 9 or 9.5. It's still about an 8 out of 10 if I were to give it like a preliminary rating. It's too early to really rate it because I don't have it in person, so I'm not going to try to give it an official rating now by any means. But the point is, it's not like top-of-the-line Safari quality. They can do better, but there are some things I absolutely love about this figure, and I really like it a lot more than I thought I was going to on, like, the first impressions. And that's why I didn't want to do a first impressions video, because now that I've given myself some time to consider things, I've realized that my opinion on this figure is really shifting. This figure is a pure and simple grower for me. Every time I look at it, I like it more than I did the last time I saw it. And that's kind of a rare thing. For me, a lot of times first impressions are kind of what stick around, and sometimes I even end up liking figures less the more I look at them. I get kind of tired, I start noticing little flaws and picking on things more. This one, though, it's nothing but improving the more I really examine it. First off, when you look at the close-up shots of it, there is a lot of detail there. It's just not captured on camera. I think once we get this thing in person, I think people are going to be really pleasantly surprised by how fine the texturing is, but I think the detail really is going to deliver more so than we thought. It might not be the crispest detail, not on the level of like a lot of ceratopsians from the recent years of Safari, but it's still, I think, a lot better than what you see when you just glance at it for the first time. Another thing are the colors. The colors didn't overly impress me at first, but now I really like them. That orange on the plates with the little markings coming in from the sides, I love that. The one part of the paint job I don't like are the brown socks on the feet and hands. I mean, socks aren't a bad thing in terms of animal coloration, but something about the dark color on just the extremities makes them look a little big and goofy, but it's not a huge problem. In general, my biggest problem with this figure is still the pose. It's very stiff, and the way the limbs are placed does look a little awkward, especially from certain angles, but I think it's really a lot better than what a lot of people are giving it credit for. I'm glad to see that a lot of people do like it, but I'm kind of surprised to see there is a lot of criticism towards this model, and I see where the criticism is coming from. I understand the complaints, but for me personally, I think when it comes to all the subjective things like color and artistic, visual styles, I really think this figure delivers, at least for my preferences. And when it comes to accuracy, oh my gosh, Safari made Sophie. Sophie is the recent specimen of Stegosaurus that is, it's really recent. I think it was discovered this year, or at least kind of the work on it was published this year, at the very least. I'm not sure of the exact dates or anything. But this specimen, for anyone who's not aware of all the information that was sort of derived from it, it really turned our view of what Stegosaurus looked like upside down. The proportions, the overall silhouette, and all that kind of stuff has been totally reworked. And this figure perfectly captures all of that new revised anatomy. And just thank goodness Safari did this. This figure for me, there's usually a couple figures that Safari does each year that really bring home their the amount to which they value education and science. For me, this figure for 2019 is like the one that really encapsulates that the most. And that's saying something, because most of these figures do quite well in accuracy, if they're not perfect. A lot of them are pretty close to perfect. This one included. So overall, yeah, this figure has really surprised me. I definitely want it. I really like this Stegosaurus. It's not top of the line Safari, but it's by no means, it's above average for me. It's like just above average, which is a lot better than I thought it was when I first kind of looked at it. Oh my gosh, this Allosaurus. I'm going to be quick on this one because I have basically no complaints. I love this Allosaurus. Just the pose alone, the pose, that bipedal posture, it is such a beautiful theropod. This has to be one of the best looking, just like silhouettes of any theropod figure in quite some time for Safari. That pose is so dynamic, it's leaning so far forward, the tail is in this beautiful arched posture for balance, and just the whole thing is so dynamic and so striking, it really grabs your attention. Just the mere shape of the thing grabs your attention. I love the colors, that moss green on top with the white flooding up from the bottom, and the dark red crests are nothing special, but they do their job. As far as I'm concerned, this figure is just a pure stunner. It is such a beautiful thing, and I can't wait to pick it up. The one flaw I see in this figure really is just how thick-bodied it is, but I don't think how bulky it is nearly as big of a problem as a lot of people are making it out to be. A lot of people are saying it's straight up overweight. To me, I don't even think I'd really notice how thick the proportions and all that are if people hadn't pointed them out. To me, this figure doesn't look overly well-fed or ridiculously thick or chunky. It just looks not shrink-wrapped. That's just the way that I see this figure when I just glance at it. For me, visually it works. Accuracy-wise, the skull shape isn't perfect, but it's still very much recognizable as an Allosaurus. And while the proportions may be a bit on the heavy-set side, I think this is a heck of a lot more likely in terms of accurate proportions than a super skinny, shrink-wrapped, overly athletic-looking animal. So, I'm in love with this figure. It's a gorgeous theropod figure. It's everything that I personally look for in a theropod figure, pretty much. And then we come to the Spinosaurus, which is the polar opposite of the Allosaurus. This Spinosaurus, plain and simple, is the worst Safari figure in about maybe 5 or 6 years. Definitely not the worst of all time, not by a long shot. You could go back to the old days in the 1990s of Safari and find way worse stuff. But for me, this figure is kind of a massive disappointment on a lot of levels. I'll try to be quick. A lot of my points are going to be pretty redundant with what other people have already said. Unlike the other figures, I felt like I had some things to add to the conversation. This one, I'm kind of just repeating what other people have already brought up, so I'll be efficient. First of all, the coloration. The coloration, plain and simple, for me personally, doesn't look good. I understand that the coloration is purely subjective, obviously, but for me, it's a giant wall of just mottled brown, and just pure and simple, it is unattractive to the eyes. That's my opinion on the coloration. For me, I have an image for my desktop background. I put it together yesterday really hastily in Windows Paint, just because I wanted to see what this looked like as kind of a little experiment. I did a big compilation image of all 10 of the new figures together, and this Spinosaurus is a genuine eyesore. I can't stop turning my eyes to look at it, and not in a good way. It just attracts so much negative attention, even when mixed in with 9 other figures, all of which are vastly better than it. Even the Carnotaurus is vastly better than it, and the Carnotaurus is just riddled with problems. So, some other issues with this figure: it's very crocodilian in its sort of soft tissue stylizations. And for me personally, that just seems artistically redundant and a bit of a trope at this point. I wish they would have gone for something more unique. And that kind of brings me to a big point that, you know, this is something that's been said, but I really want to emphasize that perhaps the biggest problem with this figure is just how forgettable it kind of is. It's a pretty non-memorable, pretty bland figure. When you compare this with all the other newer Spinosaur figures on the market, it just doesn't stand out. It doesn't have anything unique going for it. It just blends in, and it has some real negative aspects as well. The leg posture is another thing. I don't mind a swimming pose, but how is it propelling itself? How? The way the legs are positioned. You know, the legs are sticking straight out back, very awkwardly. But it would at least make sense a little bit if the head was extended out forward, like it was lunging at something in the water. Maybe it just pushed off of a riverbank or just got a big burst of speed, and now it's streamlining its body, sticking its legs back so it can really build up momentum going towards its prey. But its neck is arched and reared up. It looks like it's in sort of a waterfowl type posture, with its head sticking out of the water and its back out of the water and just its limbs below. But the arms are just hanging there, and the back legs are just sticking out like they're broken. Why isn't it paddling? You need to paddle to move. How are you moving in the water? You are not floating. Where is the propulsion? What is happening? I am so confused by the mechanics and the physics of how this thing is moving through the water. It makes no sense. Oh god. Okay, yeah. So you can tell that I'm not a big fan of this one. Hopefully I've brought a little bit more specificity to the problems of the pose. I do think some people are just saying, ugh, the legs are broken, it's bad. I think there's deeper problems than that with the pose. Like I said, I think the physical mechanics of the swimming posture just are nonsensical. Overall, though, while the Spinosaurus is quite an unattractive figure with some serious problems, and the Carnotaurus is admittedly quite a pretty-looking figure that has some more objective and anatomical flaws, overall, this year is still looking quite strong. You know what? If you take those two figures out of the equation, all the other figures at least stand up, if not exceed, the sort of quality standards that Safari has set for themselves. There's some, like the Stegosaurus or the Pteranodon, that don't exactly bring anything new to the table, but they still get up on the slightly above average level. They certainly don't sink remarkably below Safari standards of qualities, not by any means. And there's a lot of figures like the new woolly rhino or the Camarasaurus or the Styracosaurus that are some of Safari's best work ever, just gorgeous figures. To me, a year where some figures are the best yet, and most of them are about on par or average, sounds like a usual year from Safari. Most of Safari's new figures each year are right on point with those amazing standards of qualities they have, and a few of them even exceed those standards of quality. And really, the only difference is we got a couple duds. Don't let the Spino and the Carno color your opinion of this whole lineup, because they shouldn't. For me, people are acting like this is a massive drop-off. It's completely out of nowhere. It signals bad things to come. For me, this is just, it's hyperbolic, plain and simple. And I think, really, this isn't some massive drop-off. The line as a whole is not bad at all. It's just a natural fluctuation. All companies have these. They're bound to have a worse year than usual, and that's what this is. It's a little bit of a downward fluctuation, but there's no need to panic and assume it's anything more than that. If they keep going down in quality, then that would be one thing, but for me, this looks like a year with some amazing figures, a lot of figures that are right on par with what we're used to, and a couple surprising sort of failures, I guess. Failure is even kind of a strong word, to be honest. So, that's about all I have to say. I guess my final message is just that it's a worthwhile endeavor to really bring up to Safari as a company the problems with the Spinosaurus and the Carnotaurus. Getting specific and really letting them know where the mistakes lie will help them do better in the future. But I think it's also very important to not exaggerate, not freak out, not panic, and appreciate just how good the rest of the lineup really is. Overall, I'm excited for this year. I think there's a lot of great figures to look forward to, and I think if nothing else, for Safari and for us all, this year is going to be unique and a learning experience. Thank you for watching, and BionicleSaurus signing out.